Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from today. I want to thank you for joining this Tech Strong learning experience, and I'm joined with Token Security today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. It will be available on demand afterward. We're going to send you a link to the recording once we conclude. On the left side of the screen, you'll see that we've got some handouts in the resource section. If you want to check those out at any time throughout the presentation, you're more than welcome to do that. We encourage you to look through those at some point to download those. And you'll also notice on the left side of your screen, we've got an open poll. If you want to take the poll and just let us know your thoughts on that, we really like to know where you stand. And if that's not showing up, just put something in the chat so I know that I need to fix that for you. On the right side of your screen, you'll see that we've got a chat section. Anything that you want to tell us, your comments, your experiences, your understanding on the matter, we do want to hear from you. We want to engage with you throughout this presentation. So feel free to use the chat at any time. And at the bare minimum, at least tell us where you're tuning in from. And again, I encourage you to let me know if the poll is not showing up. If you scroll down below the chat on the right side, you'll see that there's a Q&A tab. If you have any questions at any time throughout the presentation, you don't have to wait until the end. Use the Q&A. Let us know any of your questions so we can take care of those at the end of the program. Let's go ahead and kick off today's topic. We've got zero trust for automations, agents, extending identity, first access control. And today I'm joined with Shlomo, co-founder and CTO at Token Security, and Jason Garbis, founder and CEO at Numberline Security. Jason, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. Go ahead and take it away from here.
All right. Thank you so much, Jared, for a fantastic introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm Ido. I'm honored to be here with Jason, so I'll let him introduce himself in a moment. But I am one of the co-founders of Token Security, a company focusing on the agentic identity space. Quite a complex space. My background comes from a really long offensive cybersecurity career, specializing in vulnerability research, implant development, coming to realize that after such a long career there, hackers don't break in, they log in. And that's why I went into identity, and AI is the most recent revolution that we're pursuing. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Jason, over to you.
Great, thanks, Ido, and thanks to the folks at Token Security for hosting this. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. So I'm Jason Garbis, founder and CEO at Numberline Security. So my background is I spent a long time in the vendor space, and in the last 15 years really focused on identity, network security, and what we now call zero trust. At Numberline, we are a consulting and advisory firm, and we help enterprises to create and execute effective zero trust strategies. And this is something that we've created based on just the experience that we've had, where in my role as an author, writing about zero trust security, leading the zero trust working group at the Cloud Security Alliance, and really having the good fortune to work with so many great enterprises and helping them solve these problems around zero trust. And with this giant tsunami of autonomous AI, agentic AI, and LLMs that we're going to talk about today, this is, we got a lot of challenges and some great technologies here to help solve them.
Awesome. Yeah, Jason, I think that you are. Yep. You want to go ahead, or should I?
Yeah, sure thing. So we're going to kick this off. I'm going to take a few minutes just talking about zero trust principles and defining them, and then we're going to have a conversation about how and why those principles should be applied to agentic AI. And of course, has a lot of experience working with clients and identifying the right ways and good ways in which to solve these problems. And I'll let you summarize what you're going to cover.
Yeah. So today we are going to go through, I think, the most major revolution digital identity has went through, at least in corporate space that I've seen. We're going to go through a bit about how, for a really long time, identity practice has been around humans. We'll talk about how that world has evolved and how other amazing companies have evolved into the machine identity space, meaning and automated processes, scripts, containers, and so on. And we are going to visit what I think is the joining of two worlds and coming full circle into an AI agent that has the mentality, the characteristics, the patterns that humans show with the velocity and scale of machines, and really dive into how zero trust for AI agents looks like at the age that we are at right now.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think I'll take a couple minutes and talk about zero trust and how we define it. So zero trust really is a security strategy, right? It's not a technology. It's not something that you buy. It is something, a mindset and a strategy that you adopt. And what that does is it really should give you this holistic view of how you're going to do things in your enterprise. And we want it to, when it's done properly, it really impacts your thoughts, your decisions, and your processes that span networking and application and data security. And of course, identity that really underscores all of this. And ultimately, when you do zero trust well, what it does is it allows you to take an effective identity-centric policy model that controls access across the whole IT ecosystem and gives you very often for the first time the ability to define and enforce these very rich set of access policies that use identity information and contextual information to make access decisions and enforce that throughout the environment, unifying network level enforcement, identity level enforcement, device level enforcement. So that definition was from my book, Zero Trust Security Enterprise Guide. If we look at what NIST says about it from the 800-207 document, there's 4 principles I want to touch on very briefly, and we'll think about how they apply to not just non-human identities, as Ido mentioned, but of course these newer AI agents. Is that first of all communications needs to be secured. And that, of course, means not just relying on encrypted protocols, but making sure that there's an understanding of what communication is allowed and what communication shouldn't be allowed. That's especially the case where you have these non-deterministic AI agents. That principle number 2 is that all access has to be determined by dynamic policy. So that's an important point, which is policy isn't static. This isn't an old-fashioned network ACL. This is a policy that can respond to changes in the environment and can do things where if you've got human beings, you might enforce step-up authentication. If you have non-human identities, that there might be some additional controls or restrictions that are imposed. The third principle is around dynamic access policies, and that the organizations, that the principal needs to take a least privilege approach, which is ensuring that these elements, these identities, have the minimum access necessary for them to be productive. And that's oftentimes a lot harder than it sounds. And then finally, the monitoring and measuring the integrity and the security of the network. And this is really important when you have these AI agents that are off, potentially doing things, that you want to make sure that what they're doing stays within bounds of what's allowed. And finally, the pillars of zero trust. This comes from the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Model. It's a really nice way of thinking about this. And there's a whole set of a whole discipline around working with these pillars and doing a maturity assessment. But the important thing is to note that you have those 5 pillars of identity, devices, networks, applications, and workloads and data. And then these 3 what are called cross-cutting capabilities at the bottom. And the most important of which is governance. The key to keep in mind is something that enterprises sometimes struggle with is this notion of, hey, these pillars are separate, right? Because visually we can see them as separate pillars, but that actually what zero trust is all about is about creating and defining and enforcing these access policies. And access policies by design are horizontal and holistic. An access policy determines which identities on which devices across which networks are allowed to access which resources, applications and workloads and data under which conditions, under which circumstances. And that applies to human identities, traditional non-human identities, and now agentic AI identities. And that's why it's important to have this platform that gives you the visibility and control across all of those things to be able to dynamically respond. So that's your 2-minute introduction to zero trust, Ido.
It sounds like you wrote a book about it. So that was masterfully done. Thanks. Now, like diving into the identity side, I think that the world has evolved so rapidly that it's fun to see also the zero trust like part taking or following step by step right with the identity security and identity access management practice. For about, I don't know, the basically first 30 years of the of identity access management technology existing, most of what we did was we tried to create appliances like Active Directory at first, and then move to the cloud with Entra ID and Okta, in order to allow ourselves, our employees, our contractors, our customers, secure access to resources. Basically, keeping the experience very, very smooth, very flexible. Every employee has a different role, takes on different permissions, and in the same time, protecting the organizational resources from a leak or unwanted access. And that is, in its core, one of the biggest principles of both identity security and zero trust. Now, once we already had our hand on that, we started really focusing on that area. We applied MFA and network limitations, trying to verify what network location is the user coming from and how to give them the dynamic access that they need. And we did that by creating amazing infrastructure, though we didn't ask ourselves what runs this infrastructure on the backend. So then we created this mesh network in the internet built on cloud services of identities that are being used by machines. That those are those backend identities that basically stitch the internet together and give access from a workload into a resource. The same way that we try to manage human identities for many years, we tried to fit the same model into machine identities. But there is a huge change in how machine identities are built and used. They are not used by humans. They are much larger in scale, meaning that they scale as the internet grows or as the organization grows. They are very rapid, meaning that the availability of your identity, if you couldn't log in to your human account for 1 minute, that's disruption in service for you. But if you can't let a machine authenticate to a database for 1 minute, that's a huge business loss or a huge downtime for a company. So velocity, volume, and especially the variance, machines are talking with different identity repositories that were very fragmented and very decentralized. Each database and each cloud service, each queuing technology, and each content delivery network has their own identity mechanism, and that created the machine identity problem. Now, this is something that we tried to solve with good credential management, discovery, and rotation, trying to keep at least a good hygiene on those authentication parts. But now comes the biggest disruptor of them all, meaning that an agent is the fun, but also the challenge of both worlds. An AI agent is basically like what a part of what amazes me in what we are doing today is that we are talking about automated processes like they are human beings. This is an SDR agent, this is a data analyst, this is a digital marketer. But underneath, it's the same code with the same pace, the same technology that runs on containers, clusters, and workloads. Meaning that we have an automated process that has all of the characteristics and flexibility of a human, a role-based or an intent-based access needed, and in the scale of machines. And this is probably, and I think that all of the people joining us today can agree, the fastest adopted technology in history since the mobile phone. Meaning that when we are talking about the scale of agents, it's in the thousandfold bigger than the scale of humans, but it suffers from exactly the same challenges that workload identity suffer. And on top of that, adding things that are very special to agents. You need to create a new role-based access control model in order to define what is the right size. When you had an automated code that did something as a workload that was easy to box, now you have an agent, it's very uneasy to box because you want it to be flexible. You want the agent to have elasticity. You want to have flexibility in permission. So how do you define access control and right sizing in the age of intent of agent? Second is that the agents are interacting with internal systems the same way as machine did. So they are going through NHIs, they are going through non-human identities, such as service accounts using API tokens, in order to consume data very rapidly. They don't have multi-factor authentication and they don't have any identity governance and administration process. And that leads us to the fact that there is a new type of, let's call it workforce, that needs a new model of ownership and accountability where we don't know whether to treat the agent as someone working and we are their managers. I'm employing a coding agent that write my code, I review it and approve it. Or is it another member in my team, meaning it has autonomous capability to act as a person or as a pseudo person, taking a new task, achieving new goals right beside me as my teammate. And that problem of defining the ownership and accountability ends up in a problem of understanding who is managing that access, how do we define it, how do we hold it accountable, how do we make sure that we still keep zero trust, but give it on the scale of machines with the flexibility of humans. So those are the main things that we talk about when we talk about agent identity challenges. Yeah, I think that's a good time for diving more than just an introduction.
Great. So a lot of challenges and a lot of things to unpack there. From basic visibility to what do you want to wrestle with first? What angle do you want to touch on first?
I think that it seems like the zero trust framework principles has like four either the pillars or the principles themselves are kind of we were able to split them between machines and humans. And I wonder how the new, the motto was never trust, always verify approach extends to the agentic space. So maybe let's start with covering what was how did we approach it at start, and then have a short discussion on how are we going to manage it today.
Yeah, sure thing. So the concept of never trust, always verify is core to zero trust. And it really comes from, if we think about a traditional security model, it was very much the castle wall, the hard perimeter and the soft interior. So once a device was on the corporate network in the old days, right, in the old model, it was much more trusted, right? And this was, okay, now we're going to trust to some degree the network traffic, the packets and the connections that are coming from that device. And we always had, even traditionally, an attempt to control things at the identity level. You didn't have a login to this application because it wasn't set up for you. It wasn't part of your job, and I did. But we never had the ability to prevent your device from accessing those systems. And that really ended up causing a lot of issues. And we've seen major breaches as a result of traditional open flat networks with that type of enforcement. So what zero trust says is, okay, we're going to get rid of that trust. I mean, literally zero trust is zero trust in your system, where all network packets, all network activity has to be only allowed after a positive validation. And when you think about moving to the traditional machine identity view, right, the same thing applies. And in theory, actually, it's easier because your non-human identities, your applications that you deploy, your systems that you deploy, should have a very known and constrained set of things they do, unlike human beings who are going to do different things on different days. However, even though it's, on paper, it's easier, most organizations are not doing as good a job as they should at restricting machine access on the network. And then with agentic AI, you kind of get the worst of both worlds, because you get unpredictable behavior, non-deterministic behavior, and you get the scale of machine identities. So it really, I think, highlights the need to have this default deny model in your environment for these new agentic AI agents.
I 100% agree. And I'm just thinking about, when we when organizations that we work with go for zero trust for machines, they assume that they can define kind of a static boundary, because a machine the idea is like, a repetitive task that pretty much follows the same pattern every time. So they define one, like at one place, the network limitations, and they know that those network limitations or those access controls that they've defined would take them really, really a long way, because that application has existed for 2 years, and why should it change? Now, when I think about agents, there is a real dilemma, because on one hand, if you limit an agent to only one pattern of access, then you're taking away all of the beauty of the agentic technology. No flexibility, no human-like behavior, no thought process behind, like the ability to make different decisions based on different conditions. So that's one option. Another option would be to make an agent act as a human, meaning that for every privileged action that the agent wants to take, you need to verify again. You need another person to press the button, another um, actor to authorize. And then you cut down all of the beauty of the robustness and the scale of agents, meaning the fact that they can do things much faster than us. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation if we don't redefine that framework again, and basically find a middle ground that holds an agent in a playing ground, or let's say a guardrails area, but still allows it for 99.9% of the actions that are not privileged and that could be automated through the intent that the agent was created for, um, not to be verified every 15 minutes or so on, or every time, even that the agent does that action, because it would eventually become just another slow human being. So I think that the middle ground is pretty interesting when we're coming to extend this never trust always verify principle.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of two levels of monitoring that has to happen. There's the in domain monitoring, if you will, which is, okay, we're creating this agent to work with this data set of this application, and as you say, I would say, after a training and a confidence period where the human beings believe the AI agent can actually perform these actions well and reliably, to allow it to do that without human intervention. Of course, there needs to be review within the application domain to make sure it's not, abusing what it's designed to do. But then there's things outside of that domain, which are, if this thing has too broad network scope or access to other databases, and it starts to do things that it wasn't intended to do, that can and really should be controlled and locked down. And that's hard to do because the business is moving so fast with the adoption of this new AI technology.
Yeah, I agree. So I wonder if we want to talk a bit about like the concept of agentic identity, because I think that right now we are at this position where we want to adopt, like, there are there are two trains and they are riding towards each other. One, we want to adopt as many agents as we can, give them access to tools, have them access organizational resources, access CRM, my mailbox, my storage, and so on. And on the other hand, we want to have identity first security, meaning that we want every action in the organization to be driven by the identity of the actor. But we have a really, really hard time defining agentic identity, because, first of all, when you create an agent's blueprint, it's the first time that you define what the identity should be, but then there are the agentic instances, meaning the invocations of that same agent become more and more and more robust. And we want every interaction in the zero trust model to begin with identity, but then what does it mean when we assign and manage an identity for an autonomous agent, and it does things differently than another autonomous agent that were both created for the same blueprint? If we allow them to have decentralized identity, that means that we don't adopt an identity first approach to our security program, and that has a whole other world of trouble. So what's better? I'm really not sure.
It's a little bit like the bad practices of sharing accounts, right? Sharing administrative accounts, where when you do that, you're immediately losing the kind of visibility and control and accountability that you have there. So yeah, it's definitely the case that you need to have a system that scales, where when you have people who on the line of business who are rightly innovative and really wanted to take advantage of this new technology, you give them a simple and straightforward way to follow these guardrails and guidelines that you put in place and make it easy for them to do the right thing, which gives you the visibility so you can detect and prevent them, or at least remediate when they're doing the wrong thing. So to give each of these agents a unique identity so that it can be tracked. And even if they're instances of the same agent, they need to have separate identities so that you can watch their behavior and have some sort of correlation between activity over here and that agent over there, so you don't lose that fidelity. I think the other side of it is the set of permissions. And one of the interesting things about agents is that, unlike an application or an application server, where if you and I both log into an application server, yes, we'll have different roles, but the application server has a very known and constrained set of things that it's going to do to the logic tier or to the database tier. An agent isn't always the case. So to some degree, there's going to be elements of our identity or our permissions that have to get carried forward into the agent. And when it's acting on your behalf, you can probably see and do different things than I can. So there's a little bit of a mixing and temporary set of permissions that have to flow through, that we don't want the agent to have kind of the superset of everyone's permissions. I don't know.
Yeah. I love it. No, first of all, for anybody that hasn't seen it, I really, really recommend seeing the part that my partner, Itamar, took with a company named Discope. Discope is one of the leaders in customer identity access management. And we were asked, why does a agentic identity company pair up with the customer identity access management? The fact is that when, for example, customers of a bank approach an AA agent of that same bank, the AA agent has a back-end identity that is what we call an anonymous identity. It's a service account, an API token, or a database credential. But the access of that agent needs to be very, very correlated with the question that the user asked it and the user that asked it. So there is an entire, really new, amazing things happening in the world of identity, where the user basically delegates its context to an agent that has pretty wide permissions, but then at the right time, the agent should have access only to that user's data. And that's a very, very, very hard thing to do with agentic technology, because at its core, it's built on tons of data, meaning that the agentic technology basics requires you to give an agent a lot of data for it to be quote unquote smart. And so there is a new area of collaboration between either customer identity access management products or workforce identity access management products, where either workforce or customers are coming and prompting an agent, and that agent has their context in order to access with an identity that is some kind of the intersection between the prompter, I would say, and the agent. So I agree that's a fantastic area to explore, and I really recommend seeing the chat that we had together at Token and Discord. I see a question in the chat. Is there any way or tool to identify what are the types of access the agent has already or their implementation phase? So I hope that I'm reading correctly. Sushant, I have a product to sell to you, but to be very, very transparent, or to talk to the business itself. Look, I think that the fact is that agentic identity right now rides on top of what used to be workload identities, meaning agents are integrating with long-lasting API keys with extremely wide permissions. They are very, very hard to detect, and those types of identities vary across a lot of corporate systems. So you need to monitor every API token mechanism or service account mechanism that you have across corporate systems, across production environments, across your employees' workstation, and that's very, very hard to track. If you had if I would recommend something to do is to pick 5 areas where you focus and see which service accounts, which API tokens were manufactured in those areas, and then try to correlate it back to your agentic platforms. Basically, create kind of on one hand, an agent inventory, and on the other hand, an identity inventory that you need to do the matching between in order to find out what the agent's access has. Um, and then you would have a mapping of what was what permissions were provisioned to that agent, what it could do, and you could feed those permissions into your log monitoring system to see if the agent extends the boundary of access they already have. So it's quite a pickle and not an easy challenge at all. Jason, do you want to take us to the next topic that is interesting for you in the area of agents and zero trust?
Yeah, so we can talk about really the concept of least privilege, which in humans it's there's a well-known and well-designed, well-understood discipline around identity governance, which is defining roles, defining access, and then there's a set of processes that well-run organizations use in their identity governance and administration program to have security team partner with the business and really define what these roles are, what access they should have, and then have really delegate into the line of business to the application owner, the data owner, the process owner, which individuals should have access to what and what they're allowed to do. And that is well understood. And I would say many, not all organizations do that well, but many do. And the world of agentic AI or AI agents it's really a new domain for us. And because this is moving so quickly, there really isn't a well understood science or practice around this in understanding how should the security team collaborate with the business? How do you even describe the type of things that an agent does? And how do you on the security team make sure that you do put these guardrails in place and you do define what least privilege really is so that these agents can't be left to their own devices, and that when they get compromised or when they hallucinate, that you're not putting the organization at risk. So part of this is clearly the types of things that you mentioned that Token does, which is gives you that visibility of where these types of credentials or authentication mechanisms, tokens, are defined and used, and to track that, but also to proactively write down ahead of time and enforce, okay, we're designing this agent and we intend for it to access this database over here and that other system over there and nothing else.
Yeah. So definitely. And I want to, identity is such a wonderful industry. It's been built on a lot of things that we need to recreate right now. So think about the amount of time that was spent into building the right workday profiles for my employees, the right permission scheme, and even the scheme provisioning of the right roles and access across so many systems. The time spent with integrators in order to build the right governance and administration process for humans. And that took us only 40 years. No rush. That was great. Now, it's amazing for me to think about it. I think that maybe 10, 12 months ago, nobody knew what the acronym MCP meant. It was like kind of I heard this new type of server and so on. And now I think the Token, look, to be honest, we're aiming pretty high. I want to be the workday of agents. I want to be maybe not necessarily to go between an agent and the target system, because that is supposed to scale in an enormous way and to help you or to facilitate a lot of business critical processes. But I want to be the source of truth. I want to be alert and monitoring about agents' use. I want to understand their intent. I want to build their profiles to analyze what they are supposed to do in the organization, to baseline what those permissions mean. We're just about to go with a release that would allow everyone that wants to define a new agent and their intent, and to understand what's the right permission scheme for them across a lot of different technologies. And in that way, also that creates the paved road for us to monitor it, for us to define the right moments for repeatable verification, for us to explain where a human in the loop would eventually go in. And I think those are the parts, by the way, of least privilege. Like I hate to say it, but gone are the days that we are looking at audit logs from the last 90 days, and by that defining what what someone could access or what a machine could access. Like, these agents are going to be smart, and they are going to build themselves, and they are going to change, and eventually we are going to be left as identity practitioners with a lot of tech debt, a lot of inactive and agents that, like, that movie I, Robot, that Will Smith go into a warehouse full of robots that have gone out of commission. So we will need to decommission them safely and to eliminate those permissions when they go stale or when their agentic role was retired. So that's what token is a bit about doing. Not only, like, least privilege is the effect. Following that principle really leads to better, I think, experience and security. But the underlying technology is to reinvent the entire identity practice from scratch, basically.
And it's important to recognize, as you mentioned, that this isn't one agent. There's going to be, in some cases, hundreds or thousands of agents, and these agents are going to be interacting with one another. So it's not enough to look at a single agent in isolation and say, okay, we've done a great job. We've constrained what this agent can do. It's understanding that you're going to have a lot of agents that are performing single or small tasks, but when they get chained together or when they talk to each other, that you have to understand, okay, what's the flow of either trust or identity or authentication that flows through? Because when one of those agents gets compromised or hallucinates, how does that pollute the rest of the downstream calls, and how could this be abused, either intentionally or unintentionally?
Yeah, 100%. I just saw this crazy phenomena of organizations adopting, like, crazy in a good way. First of all, I would say a lot of times when I need to build an identity management program for an agentic workforce of an organization that I'm working with, I'm thinking, what if I told you that in this role of, like, an SDR or a RevOps analyzer or a data analyst, I would put a drunk teenager. And that's how I formulate the permission scheme of what we should do, meaning that zero trust is going to be much harder in for agents, because it's still an evolving technology that has a lot of gaps in its, I would say, not necessarily integrity, but accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you try to feed it with data. You give agents context such as file, or you allow agent to look up either online or your internal system for internal knowledge. But then every agent has a little bit of a different piece of your organizational knowledge. And when you create agentic systems that interact with each other, then that factor of inaccuracy multiplies by a lot. And so if you don't have a central agentic inventory, and you can't even say what permissions does your agent has, what data could they access, what are they holding, what's their internal knowledge base, it would be very hard for you to calculate whether the eventual result of one agent talking to another is accurate for you. So I 100% agree. All right, so I see, or maybe let's talk about a thing that is very, very or addresses not necessarily the experience or effectiveness of agent, but more of the security part. We have big compliance frameworks approaching the agentic space. Kind of like, I think that the cornerstone of zero trust is the ability to understand and be visible into every transaction. And now that like organizations are trying to achieve full observability into the AI driven actions and decisions, um, how can we ensure that we can attribute every action to something that is a verifiable identity? I think that relates to what we spoke about, whether agents has identities or not, but the ability to track those actions has been hard even before agentic technology was here. So, Jason, what do you think about like evolving that practice of visibility and auditability? Let's call it.
I think there's, agents, of course, are opaque and unpredictable, and they hallucinate, which is to say they make errors. So I would say there's two layers to this. So one clearly is understanding from an outside perspective, what should this agent be doing? And typically that means looking at its behavior from a network perspective, sometimes an on-system perspective, but what components on my network or externally is it connecting to, and should it be allowed or not allowed to connect to? And really, it's important, especially if you have agents that do have the capability to reach out across your network, that you do apply a default deny principle to that. There's no reason for an agent to be reaching out to the internet or reaching out to local systems or data sources unless that's something you've specifically modeled for and you specifically allow. It's just too easy for these agents either to try to do something unexpected or for them to get compromised through lots of different ways, prompt injection or data poisoning, et cetera. So that's really the observability side of things. And to some regard, I think you want to think of this just like malicious insider monitoring or anomaly detection for user devices. A really simple analogy in an organization, you should have a very clear distinction between your admin or technical users and your non-technical users. And there's no reason that someone on the finance team should ever be trying to SSH into another system. They don't even know how to spell SSH, right? So that should be a clear alert if a finance user system tries to SSH to something else. Likewise, if you have this agentic AI system and it tries to connect to a database or a data source that you're not expecting, then that should be an alert. It should be blocked, and B, it should be detected and responded to. And part of this is what you touched on, which is, okay, well, how do I know, right, ahead of time so I can set these rules up? And clearly there's sit down with the owner of that agent and talk about this, and you map out exactly what it needs so that when it does get deployed, that you can put these controls in place, and you work from a position of allowing, explicit allow and default deny, and not the inverse. I think the second piece is kind of inside the system, right? If this agent is designed to interact with your bank customers and potentially make changes to their account configuration, clearly there needs to be a lot of auditability and configuration of that, so you're not enabling ridiculous transfer limits or refunding too many customer fees because they complain or things like that, right? Clearly that part of it needs to be monitored very carefully.
Yeah, 100%. I always think about the case where people are delegating their access to agents, and then agents interact with systems in a way that you wouldn't expect. Like you're saying, okay, I have this, a ticket that I got from my, like as a support ticket. I need to maintain a system and maybe reboot a service. The agent might do it in a way that looks completely like malware, but you run it on your own endpoint in order to carry out the task. Now you are flagged as a very, very suspicious user because you are running commands very, very fast. You are doing it in a way that doesn't display the patterns of access that you did before. And on top of it all, now you have to re-authenticate every 5 minutes just because the agent ran 100 or 1,000 commands, and that spoiled your day. So it's not only about the agentic access itself, it's what happens when agents are delegated the access of humans. which is pretty interesting area. And maybe we can take 5 more minutes to discuss one of my favorite topics, which is, and I know that not everybody really thinks that that's the most interesting part of identity practice or zero trust, but you know how about like 5 years ago we started with this trend of going passwordless, and now I feel that secret management and credential management are making their grand return. I'm happy to announce that when you're using MCP servers and when you're using agents that are hosted on different platforms, you are back again using long-lasting credentials. You're using API keys, tokens, and now we need to guide ourselves again to enable agents to consume credentials from vaults, to rotate, to verify the secrets that we have. And now that we have agents that need to access new systems or provision new access, we need to give agents the ability to maybe generate their own credentials, or maybe share them between sessions. So I'm wondering, how do you see the evolution in terms of zero trust, the evolution or the degradation, and see what can we do better today?
Part of what you mentioned is, it really ties back to governance and processes around credential management or key management. And we've you look back, let's look even at old technology. You talk to an enterprise and you say, okay, well, how often do you rotate your domain credential keys? And sometimes that's never, right? Sometimes if they do it regularly once a year, that feels like that's a pretty good thing. But you fast forward to where we are today, you have these access tokens that are now issued and copied and reused. And I agree that it's very important to, from day one, build in a system where they expire very quickly, so that when they get lost or compromised or inadvertently pasted and posted into GitHub, that they have no value. We've seen time and time again where API keys get posted out publicly or stolen, and they're good for months and months, and they get abused to incredibly bad effects. But having a system where these things get issued and refreshed, heck, even in just a few minutes, as long as that's automated and happens behind the scenes, then it doesn't take any additional human interaction, and it provides you with a much safer, much more robust environment. Because when things go bad, then you have a high degree of confidence that, okay, a malicious actor has stolen this token, but it's only valid for 3 minutes. So we really, are reducing the blast radius here. And yes, we have to fix that problem, but at least they don't have access to our environment indefinitely.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just happy that we're not going through it in the first time, but that agents are suffering a bit from the same challenges that.
Oh, I think Ido has frozen, at least on my end. Okay, well, assuming that we're still live here, and we'll wait for Ido to come back. I think what's interesting is I pointed out a few parallels between sort of traditional identity, traditional security, where you're relying on human beings, and you have obviously the constraints of human beings. We operate at this speed, we're unpredictable, et cetera. And that there are, in general, good practices and well-known ways of approaching this in enterprise security. We've seen enterprises, some do a good job and some do a not that great job of the basics, right? Identity and access control, MFA, governance, making sure that you have visibility into your workloads and your applications, and where security is partnering with the business. And this really gets magnified and amplified in this new world of agentic AI, where you have things that are operated much faster and at a much higher much higher scale and scope. So that's why it's important to, when you work with vendors, like what Token provides, to give you this visibility and the tools that you need in this new world to apply governance. So governance and security is one of my favorite concepts, and I can bore everyone to death by talking about it for hours, but it is really important. And what it relies on is, in fact, forces you on the security team to have a partnership with people on the business, the application owners and the data owners and the process owners. And when you do that, it's all good, right? It helps security be better, and it also helps the business innovate in a way that is secure. Welcome back, Ido.
Thank you. I said a slight internet hiccup.
So yeah, I was just wrapping up and talking about governance and talking about, in this new world and the scale at which you operate, why it's so much more important, because whatever you do has to be automated. It has to be codified in policy. You can't rely on human scale processes anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I think that right now it's more important than ever to have like central control. It's harder than it ever was to keep these decentralized identity inventories in check, to have correlation between what you want as a business to do and what access do you give for that. The zero trust, the entire approach, but all of the things that we did in order to face that gave us tons of experience in order to make it work right now. But the pace of technology is absolutely phenomenal these days. I think that on that note, that's a great place to make a stop here. To thank everybody for joining. Thank you, Jason, for sharing your amazing experience. I had like a great time discussing this with you, and I wish that I want to end with a very happy remark that human identity was hard, but we made good effort on that to secure it. Then machine identity was um, harder. I won't compare, but it was harder. I think that agentic identity, if we look at it as a positive note, it could be this, like solving that could be a solution for both the prior identity movements. So thank you everybody for joining, and thank you for the time.
Thank you.
All right, Ido, Jason, I also want to thank you for taking the time to join us. It's been a pleasure having you. The content that you shared has been great. And for our audience and everyone who's here, thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to Ido and Jason as well. I do want to give you a quick reminder on the left side of your screen. We do have the resources. We've got handouts. We uploaded the slides. We also have a quick 4-question survey. If you can fill that out, it helps the Token Security team. It helps me here at TechStrong. Your input is invaluable. Give us your feedback. We'd really appreciate that. And once again, this program was recorded. You will receive a link in your inbox shortly after we conclude today's session. And I want to thank you once again for taking the time to join us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.